John was driving home late at night after a long day at work. The streets were deserted and the sky was covered with thick clouds. When he approached the bus stop, the last bus of the night was just pulling up. The bus looked old, peeling paint, dim lighting, creaking doors. There were only a few people inside. Most of them were deep in thought, staring at their phones or out the window. Sighing, John sat in the middle of the bus next to the window and leaned back tiredly. But something strange caught his attention. A man in a hoodie was sitting in the very back seat. His face was hidden in shadow, and he sat completely still, his hands clutching his knees. John felt a slight uneasiness. Something about this man's figure seemed unnatural, as if he was not just quiet, but somehow wrong. "I'm tired, that's why I'm stressing out," John muttered under his breath, turning away to the window. The bus started moving and a heavy silence fell over the interior, broken only by the rumbling of the engine. But after a few minutes, John felt the gaze again. He glanced furtively over his shoulder. The hooded man was sitting in the same position, but now his face was slightly raised, as if he were looking directly at John. The bus moved slowly through the deserted streets, stopping at every stop. At the first, a man in a suit got off and sat closer to the exit. John noticed that the interior had become slightly darker, as if the lights had been dimmed. He glanced back furtively. The hooded man was still sitting in his seat, but his posture had changed. He was leaning forward slightly, as if he was about to stand up. At the next stop, the couple who had been quietly talking in the front seats got off. Now only John and the figure in the back remained on the bus. With each stop, John's anxiety grew. As the bus moved again, he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. His heart began to beat faster. The hooded man was now sitting a few rows closer. "Hey," John said, but his voice was weak, almost a whisper. There was no answer. John tried to convince himself that it was just his imagination. Maybe the other passenger had just decided to change seats, but he heard no footsteps, no creaking of seats. At the next stop, the driver got out of the cab and checked something outside. As the doors slammed shut and the bus started moving again, John turned around. The hooded man was now sitting directly behind him. His face was in shadow, and from under the hood he could hear his breathing, quiet and almost inaudible. "What do you want?" John asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The figure leaned closer. He could feel the cold air now, as if it had become much colder. "You shouldn't have gotten on that bus," the hooded man whispered in a voice that sounded unnatural, as if it had several layers. The bus rolled forward through the deserted streets, lit only by dim streetlights. John felt his heart pounding harder. He tried to focus on the road signs outside the window to distract himself, but his gaze kept returning to the shadows behind him. At the next stop, the driver turned to face the passenger. "Last stop for everyone except you," he said in a cold voice, not looking at John. John flinched. The driver looked strange, his face half hidden in shadow, his words lifeless, as if they were being spoken by someone else. The bus started moving again. Now John and the hooded figure were alone. "Look, if this is a joke, it's not funny," John said, turning around. The figure was sitting right behind him. Its face was still hidden, but now he heard his name clearly. "Young?" His voice shook as he tried to answer. "Who are you?" The answer was a low, layered whisper. "I was the last before you." The hooded figure rose slowly. Its presence filled the space around them, and the cold became almost unbearable. John jumped up from his seat, rushing towards the driver. "Stop the bus!" he shouted, but the driver did not even turn around. The bus suddenly filled with sound, the grinding noise, like metal being torn apart from within. The lights began to flicker, and outside the windows there were no more streets, only black emptiness. "You're late!" a voice sounded right next to his ear. John turned and saw a face, or what was left of it, dark, disfigured, with a smile stretched into an unnatural grimace. The lights went out. The next morning the bus never returned to the depot. The driver and passengers had disappeared without a trace. People say that sometimes late at night, an old bus with dim lights appears on deserted roads, and if you get on it, you will never be able to get off.